Well, thanks, Commissioner. Thanks to the board, and thanks to everyone throughout the state who worked hard, both the teachers and the school board members, superintendents, for what was a really eventful year. Obviously ended in a way that was different than I think what a lot of us anticipated at the beginning of last school year. But I know folks worked really hard under really a lot of extenuating circumstances. So you have my gratitude for that, and I know a lot of people throughout Florida really appreciate the hard work. We had in this last legislative session a number of key priorities, but our number one priority was to make the 2020 session the year of the teacher. We had proposed taking Florida from the bottom half of states in terms of average minimum teacher compensation and to bring us into the top 5. And Commissioner Corcoran was instrumental in articulating that plan, and then I obviously supported it and campaigned on it. It was tough because it had never really been done at this level before, certainly in the last generation, and we knew that it was going to require a significant financial commitment, but we really believed that it was the right thing to do, not only to reward teachers who were doing a good job, but also to continue to bring good people into the profession and ultimately benefit our students' education. So we fought for it, and were able to achieve a total of $500 million of increase for teacher compensation. Most of that will go to that average minimum. I think that brings us to number 5 in the nation for the average minimum salary. And then there was the balance of the money would go to teachers who were already making more than that, so that they were able to share in the compensation. So that was a huge win in terms of getting that through the legislature. The problem is that the budget was done and everything was done and ready for my review the second week of March, and I think everybody knows that the fiscal situation at the March time frame to now was just different. Heck, even the second week of March, people were talking about coronavirus, but basically do very kind of just basic things. No one was really talking about the economy stopping, even at that point. So I knew that we'd have to deal with it, so we kept the budget. The legislature kept it. I said, it's not due till July 1st. I need to wait to make sure we have as much information as possible to be able to make the good decisions. And it was clear to me that we were going to need to save a lot of money out of that budget through gubernatorial vetoes of individual projects and line items. We had lost revenue in April, in May and June, not quite as much as was forecast, but it was still significant reductions. And so we had to plan for, even though we're working to get back on our feet, we had to plan for reductions in the expected revenue. So I was in a situation where I had to realize historic savings in terms of vetoes, but I also wanted to preserve some of the historic achievements that we made during the legislative session, chief among them the teacher compensation, but also things we did with environment and some of the other key areas that I know a lot of Floridians care about. So we were able to do a record-breaking $1 billion in vetoes. I vetoed some of my own stuff because you just had to make tough decisions, but we did that while preserving the increase for teacher compensation. And so that was something that I think is good. It was tough to get there, but we did, and I think we'll be better for it over the long haul. We also were able to continue to increase choices for parents and students, whether it's fortifying the Gardner Scholarship for our kids with unique abilities, whether it's expanding the Family Empowerment Scholarship. You know, that has a real impact on a lot of lives, particularly folks who are low income, and then in the case of the Gardner Scholarship, in terms of students that do need that special attention and that special type of education. So I think it was a really good year for parents in terms of their educational options. Commissioner Corcoran, I'm sure they're going to talk about what's going to happen in terms of the next school year. I know a lot of parents are trying to figure out, what exactly is going to happen. We're in the midst of a coronavirus pandemic, but we're also in a situation where we need to provide as many options to parents as possible in terms of the education of their kids. And I've said from the very beginning, how this thing evolves and how we move towards having school back in session. Any parent, has the option to opt for whatever they think is best for their kids in terms of academic, safety, what have you. So that means you want to continue with virtual learning, even though your school district may have kids back in school. As a parent, we need to empower them to make those decisions. Now, having done this, looked at this data since February in terms of the coronavirus, I can tell you I have 3 kids, all young. I am really amazed at the extent to which people under 18 are low risk for this. And that is something that has been, I think, borne out in the data in different countries, different states. And so we do have data to go on. We can say that, fortunately, our school children are at less risk. And, in Florida, we never closed, even though we went to distance learning with the K through 12, we never closed daycares. Now, some of them had to because of financial pressure, but there was never a government mandate at the state level, and even places like Miami-Dade maintain them. And, you didn't have major issues resulting from that, and I think it's because you have the kids who are not likely to get seriously ill compared to other demographics, but then also, and I think this is borne out in research that we're seeing all across Europe and the experience in Europe, is particularly primary school age kids are not significant transmitters to adults. For whatever reason, with influenza, you typically view the kids as the main driver of the epidemic, and particularly in a school situation. That has not been the case in any of these studies that have looked at it. And so I think that's important too, because obviously the health of the individual student is paramount. But then even if they are not significantly at risk, which I think is the case, if they're going to contribute to the epidemic spreading just because they're in school and potentially exposing the adults who are there, that's something that obviously needs serious consideration. That was probably the main reason why most places went to distance learning in March, because by mid-March, we did have a pretty good sense of kind of the age stratification for risk on this thing, really skewed older, and then once you got into the middle ages, it was more linked to comorbidities, and then fortunately, under 18 really was almost entirely linked to significant underlying health issue. So I think we understood that, but I think it was okay. We don't want this to contribute to expanding the epidemic, and so I think that's why places around the country made that decision. But I think like the experience with daycare, not only in Florida but around the country, actually they've looked at New York, who in the height of theirs, having the daycares open and not seeing the child to adult transmission. So I think that's something that's important because, the best interest of the child is obviously paramount, but we also understand that there are a lot of adults who are working in our school system as administrators, as teachers, and then a whole host of other things that go a part of it. And I think it's paramount that there's a safe environment for everybody and not merely just the kids. And I think with Richard working with the school districts, I know they're working really hard to develop ways to have a safe environment. I'm confident it can be done, because I've seen it done in other areas of life over the past several months, not just here in Florida, but around the country. It does take effort. It takes attention to some of the risks that are involved. And whether it's a school situation, whether it's anything with state government, I think the private sector has embraced the notion that if you have an employee who is particularly at risk for this, then by all means, you have to have special accommodations that are provided. That would be true for a student too, and it would also be true for an employee, an adult employee. That I think that is without question, regardless of what you're talking about. And so we have a good sense of kind of who the more at-risk individuals are and who may be lower risk even amongst the adult population. But I think it's important that parents have the ability to make a choice. If they're not comfortable, the last thing you want to do is shove people in if they're just not comfortable. Look, we have some parents that really want the kids back in school. They think it's important. You know, we have some others who, you know, look, it's a time. There's a lot of fear out there, a lot of anxiety. You know, me at this moment wouldn't be as comfortable. And I think I told Commissioner Corcoran, as you do this, you have to give the parent that option to opt for virtual if you want to. So I think it's important as you're looking at the reopening, focusing, of course, on health risks, viral transmission, all that, very important, but also looking at the risks on the other side of not giving an option for parents to have in-person instruction. As much as Florida's done, I think really been a leader in the virtual education, bottom line is our kids fell behind just like everybody else. There's just no way around that. Heck, if you didn't fall behind, we wouldn't have worked so hard to get the teacher salary increases. We believe that teacher there is really significant to a child's well-being, and that's, I think, something that we really have to consider. What are the risks of not providing that type of option for a parent? And yes, parents, some of it's linked to the economy, particularly lower income families. They may not have child care options. They want to go back to work and all that. And that's part of it. But quite frankly, for me, it's more about the risk to the development of our school children. That's paramount and really should be what the decision rests on. And I think that having gone through what we went through, the academic achievement suffers, just the socialization, being able to be with other kids, activities, all these different things are very, very important. And you know, I am concerned if that's not available for anybody. So it's important. But I think, you know, having a lot of input from the public. And I was in Miami-Dade yesterday. Miami-Dade County, in terms of the coronavirus, is more challenges than other parts of the state, even as other parts of the state have seen more outbreak than we had been seeing in April, May, and early June. You know, Miami-Dade has had to deal with it, I think, in a much higher level. Part of that is because of the population density. Some of it is about because they have extended families who tend to get. There's a lot of reasons, and so you look at that situation. And they're going to have to make certain decisions there. Then you look at other school districts that would probably be in a different part. So I'm very sensitive to local conditions, not just in terms of what the virus is doing, but also in terms of what the parents would like to see. And most of the people I've talked to, I think, like, if you go back, if we were doing this at the beginning of June, probably a strong majority would have said, let's get back. As we've started to see more outbreak at the end of June and into July, you know, that has now become more split. And I think, you know, you'd be foolish not to listen to the parents and make sure they have all the options that they need. So I know folks are antsy about, you know, what exactly is going to happen. Are we going to be in or not? And, you know, what I would just say is I think it's probably, as much as we'd like to have every decision made as far out in advance as possible, because that is good, it lets people plan. I think making the right decision and providing the right array of options, getting it right is probably the most important thing. And I know a lot of these school districts are really working hard to try to get it right, balancing a lot of different priorities and a lot of different issues. And so my hat's off to those who are working for this. Final thing I'll say is just, we've been very active in distributing funds that we received from the Federal CARES Act. We announced this distribution last month. You're looking at a pretty significant amount of money, $173 million Governor's Fund, $223 million Child Care Fund, and then 10% of the $770 million that was sent to school districts. So a large focus for us in terms of where we're putting the money is on reading proficiency. We want to have 90% of students proficient in reading by 2024. $64 million will be used to close achievement gaps. This will support 4 to 6 week programs on school campuses to students from kindergarten to grade 5 who are identified as having substantial deficiency in reading based on the most recent available screening and progress monitoring assessment and with teacher recommendations considered. We're going to do $20 million to engage school districts and schools in identifying and adopting the best reading curriculum and supplemental instructional materials to drive teaching and learning, particularly in those early grades, K through 3. $15 million will be used to train and develop 2,000 highly effective reading coaches, develop and deploy strategy for in-classroom support with reading coaches, and develop regional support teams to identify and assist students with reading improvements. $45 million is set aside as safety net funds for various scholarship programs. $8 million will be used to allow every public school student in 2021 academic year to take the ACT or the SAT free of charge. $5 million will be used to expand civic literacy in our schools. We also have a lot of money for workforce and job training programs, $35 million to increase capacity around short-term, in-demand technical certificate programs, market-driven and in-demand clock-hour career certificate programs, and in-demand industry certification preparation courses at our state and technical colleges. And one of the things I think that's going to come out of this period is when a lot of companies went to remote work from home, a lot of them in the white-collar world found they didn't really miss much of a beat. And they don't necessarily need to have the big buildings and office buildings and everything anymore. You can't, though, and I think that's probably going to mean they'll probably have fewer people employed over the long term. So that's going to be a concern. But then I also think that there's really going to be no substitute for some of this vocational hands-on skills that people need to be able to make the economy function in a wide variety of areas. And so we've put a lot of emphasis on that, and we think it's going to continue to be important. We dedicated $2 million for increased telehealth services for students who are experiencing difficulties, particularly with mental health during this period. Our Division of Emergency Management is going to coordinate with school districts across the state to survey school district needs for personal protective equipment and other sanitation supplies. And then finally, the $223 million child care fund will be used for early learning programs, including $55 million to provide financial assistance to child care providers, infrastructure, personnel, cleaning supplies, and other costs to maintain a safe environment. $16.9 million in funding to high-quality child care providers who agree to reopen as part of the Florida school reopening plan, and $18 million in funding for successful transition to kindergarten program to implement summer programs for approximately 45,000 rising kindergarten students identified with limited language and emergent literacy skills as determined by the voluntary pre-K assessments and teacher recommendations. So there's a lot of initiatives that are afoot as a result of some of the assistance that we received from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and I know we're hoping for good things on that. And finally, I would just say, thanks for everyone throughout Florida for hanging in there, hanging tough during a really difficult period for our country and certainly for our state. I have no doubt that we're going to get through this. We've got a lot of strength and determination. We're gonna get it done. We're gonna do what's right for our kids, and we're going to continue to support our educators because those are the right things to do. So to the members of the board, I want to thank you for all your hard work. I know you guys have a lot of stuff going on in your own personal lives, and to take the time out to really be here for something that's so important, education in the state of Florida. I appreciate your service, and I look forward to seeing what you guys do over this meeting in the weeks to come. Thank you.
Thanks, Governor.